Hello everyone, my name is Fox. I had previously done some preview coverage of the AYANEO Next. There are a few key areas from that initial preview that I'd like to update my opinion on, and package up this video as my final review of the AYANEO Next. Ultimately, I'd like to ask the question, should you buy an AYANEO Next? First, I'd like to address my comments on the D-pad and buttons. With regard to the D-pad, the overall feel of the D-pad is still not something I particularly like, but in practice, it's a solid D-pad and I never experienced any erroneous input. The one part I do like about the AYANEO Next D-pad is the overall snap when pressing in any given direction. This snappiness on input is similar to the face buttons themselves, which are genuinely excellent. The one main point I'd like to address here is that the D-pad is quite unique, and while I wouldn't say it's my favorite D-pad, if I had to assign a grade to it, I'd say it's a 7 out of 10, and the only reason for the points deduction is its uniqueness not gelling with me. Rounding out the inputs, I'd like to take a brief moment here and talk about the triggers. When I first had the device, the triggers themselves have this grand, smooth motion to them. They have a crazy amount of travel and a consistent tension. If I had to say one negative thing about the analog triggers, it's that they are almost a little too perfectly suited for racing or flying games. What I find myself doing in other genres is partially pressing the input, which feels a bit odd, truth be told. Pivoting over to other inputs, it needs to be said immediately that the analog sticks are my absolute favorite part of the AYANEO Next. The fundamental design, how tall the sticks are, how they travel, the consistency of the travel, it lines up with everything I look for. The only sore point is that I am of the opinion that the analogs themselves could use a firmware update. The iSpace app is helpful in how it instructs you to try and recalibrate the analogs in real time, but even when doing so, there is still a small area of the analogs that don't internally offer the full travel. Fundamentally, the AYANEO Next overall design is well done with fantastic ergonomics for its size. I don't think firmware-wise for the gamepad anything needs to be improved outside of the small analog issue, and it is possible to retune this with other software to modify dead zones and travel. Before I talk about what to expect gaming-wise, I'd first like to talk about the iSpace app. When I first got this app and tried it weeks ago, there was a considerable amount that just wasn't functioning properly. I'm pleased to report that it's actually fixed a lot of issues I had with it initially, and there is a lot of genius behind its design. Not only does it help with finding updates for your device, it helps walk you through some issues you might be having. On top of that, the buttons have been condensed down and can be tuned to do whatever you like, provided the iSpace app is running. At this point, it's a nice time for me to segue into the gaming functions. There is a way to use FSR quickly from the iSpace quick menu, which is one of the best ways to maximize the potential of the AYANEO Next. Now, while the AYANEO Next doesn't have the GPU horsepower of the new Steam Deck coming, what it does have is the CPU to hit high frame rates. So most of the time when running AAA games, the most advisable course of action is instead to pivot the workload to be a CPU problem. So how do we do that? Well, you run games in windowed mode and select a lower resolution. With FSR, we can upscale and improve the image quality. The end result is good enough image quality with exceptional frame rate. The last part we need to talk about is obviously that the Zen 3 CPUs will undoubtedly perform better in specific high-end emulation applications. To come back to my original question, is the AYANEO Next worth buying? When we position the AYANEO Next compared to the Steam Deck, there are only a few areas the AYANEO Next has an advantage. First, the Zen 3 CPUs are really quite good, and having 8 core and 16 threads using the AYANEO Next as your main computer becomes a more viable option. Naturally, I'd only say this is worthwhile when the machine is docked, but it's still clearly an advantage. The other advantage for the AYANEO Next is that it's available in more regions than the Steam Deck is. So for some people, the Steam Deck just doesn't have any availability. Last, the AYANEO Next is also still a bit smaller than the Steam Deck is. For some people, this is a big enough difference to matter. The price is largely what is going to come up as the main difference most people will see and when we compare on that metric. And when we compare it from that metric, I'm in agreement. The Steam Deck is easily the better value. That's where the end of my review is going to stay. There are qualities of the AYANEO Next that offer compelling reasons why someone would want it. With gaming concerned, the CPUs are its best asset, and you'll need to orient games you play to be CPU bound to make the most of them on this system. Ultimately, you'll have to make the determination if these advantages the AYANEO Next has are worth the increased cost over the Steam Deck. If you were to ask me, since I happen to be in a position to get a Steam Deck, would I get the $650 512GB version of the Steam Deck, which is most comparable to the AYANEO Next, which has a 1TB SSD but starts at $1,400? While the controls on the AYANEO Next are quite good, they aren't on a whole other level better than the Steam Deck. This is why the answer would be that I would still get the Steam Deck. But the Steam Deck is available in my region, and the design of these systems are both oriented towards gaming exclusively. If the AYANEO Next was a hybrid design, I could see myself making another decision. Again, ultimately, you'll have to make the determination what you're looking for to get out of these systems. I'm going to leave it out here as this is the end of my review. There will be some game demos after this if you care to see. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.